Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed your small group discussion. We're going to spend some time now processing out the case study and the added article. So I'm very excited about that article and the additional questions that SICSS-Howard Mathematica site is adding to this exercise. This is not just about ethics and data. We also have to consider the experiences of different types of people whose data are taken in hacks. I'm going to start out our discussion, and then I'm going to hand it over to Todd and Regina, our alumni legacy TFs for the day, who are going to continue the moderation of the event. I will drop to the background and handle making sure that questions are responded to and such. Well, we're going to start out by just getting the big picture. Y'all know how much I love the big picture. We are looking for a general description of this case. So we're looking for who are the players, what did they need, what did they do, what did they find, what's like the law, the decisions, the arguments, all that good stuff. So I'm going to put all those questions in the chat box for you. We're looking for a general overview. So we can have one person do this, or we could piece it together as a community, but let's just have people just jump in. So feel free to unmute and let's piece together this case. What happened? And we're going to remove all the spotlights so we can see the entire community here. Great. And please set on gallery mode so you can see each other. So who wants to start us off? I do not volunteer people. So who's going to start us off? Unmute yourself so we can see that and tell us what happened in this case.
What was your question again? You said reiterate the big picture.
Yes, tell us what happened in this case.
Well, basically to summarize, the Patreon data was leaked, and there's a question or data that was desired by researchers was leaked. And now the question is, should we use it? Should we not? It's the data that was already available, now tainted.
Thank you, Jovante, for starting us off. What else do we know? If you just heard his description, you're like, oh, we forgot this detail. Unmute and share another detail. Don't have to do the whole thing, just throw in a detail. Rebecca.
I think another to add Jovante's story is that so what a researcher initially wanted to collect information from Patreon is public available, but they were just using data scraping method to get it. But the data breach means that some private information was also leaked out. So does that taint the data that was publicly available?
Cool. That's two people. What else we got? What else is missing?
Well, I don't know if it was included in there, but Patreon is a site where people pay to support artists doing certain things. And so one aspect that we talked about was that there may have been financial data in the personal data because of the nature of Patreon and the fact that it's for people that are struggling and they're using kind of crowdsourcing to finance their projects.
Any other additions? The struggling artist piece is interesting because there's some original creative activity that could be in there too. So if anybody's an artist, has worked with artists before, it happens a lot often that folks will find their paintings and things like that up on websites and taken. So anything else we want to add to this? Any other background?
I guess there's no law that specifically tells you what to do in this situation. And so they reached out to the Association of Internet Researchers in a forum to ask people whether it was acceptable to use this data. And no one had an answer. I mean, there was no consensus. So that's also something to think about when we're working with computational data. There's no yes or no.
And sometimes the work that we're doing will precede law big time. So there's a moral compass that needs to be part of this. Were there arguments for and against that were provided? Somebody want to go over that?
I can't turn on my camera right now, but one of the things that I think was important about this case was it was a question of precedent, right? And what happens if we don't actually take any kind of, if we don't take a stance against something like this, what does it mean for research that happens down the road with regards to hacked data and how that can kind of snowball?
And I'll also add in there that, you know, if these things happen before the law, they definitely happen before considerations of people of color in the law too. Like, you know, we're like way behind that. You know, think about the right to vote for women. You know, did Black women get that when that happened to white women? Not so much, right? So, Asha, you've got a comment? And then I'm going to turn things over to Todd and Regina.
Yeah, we had interesting discussion about it in between. When I said that I come from where you know, I customize data, or I collect data for my research. For me, the most important it's people. I listen to people's stories, and it's vulnerable families and children. So the bottom line is, do I have consent to use this data for whatever purpose I want to use? So for me, it is big no, because that's my bottom line, that they have not said yes. So if I do not have that, I don't see why I should be using it. But then there was another perspective that this is the only way, and I'm going to really make great change in this, you know, globally or nationally, and there is no other way I can do this. But then we all agreed that in social sciences, I mean, we usually do slow-paced research, and is there anything that would make overnight changes? That it is so important that I cannot compromise with my eagerness to do this research and look at my ethical values. That do I still want to go ahead and use this data just to produce few publications or get this out there? Then the third was like where I mean, my point was that there are layers to it. If I have no other way and I still want to use it, then it all comes down to, you know, like my training of being transparent and let my reviewers, you know, who are gatekeepers, and let them decide how ethical and why it is needed for the field. I may have, you know, narrow vision why I'm using it, but I would be as transparent as I can, just the way I am in my, you know, where I collect data, and I'm being transparent how I collect, what's the process and all of that. So if I'm using hacked data, why I'm using it, that's very important for me. But yeah, so there was like few ways we looked at it.
Thank you so much. Susanna, could you read out loud what you put in the chat box for us, and then I'll hand it over to Todd and Regina, and they will continue to ask some questions and make sure we cover any details left. Susanna, can you share what you wrote?
Saw this tweet by Chris Bell that said that I think is so relevant to what we're talking, because he says, what is the worst possible headline someone could write about your research? A great ethics gut check for all researchers to ask before starting a study that I learned during, you know, remarkable lecture today, blah, blah. And I think we also touched upon this on our discussion, that it has to be principle led, and that it has to be guided by our principle in moral compass.
All right, Regina, take it away.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that summary, and like also bringing in what you discussed in your group. So for this first set of questions, I'm going to do a bit of a group census. So I'm going to ask you all to use the hand raising feature. For the first question, does the illegal nature of the data collection and the release of private data taint the data in the release that was already publicly available? If you believe that's the case, please use your hand raising feature to raise your hand.
Are you saying, was it illegal to say that again? Would you read the question again? Sorry.
So since this was released this data was released illegally, does that mean that the private data is now tainted? This publicly available data is now tainted because the private data was released illegally. Raise your hand if you agree that's the case. Okay. Interesting.
Can you say what you mean by like tainted data? Because that was a conversation that we had, and that'll help me to know if I want to raise my hand or not.
Yeah, so like some of the data that was already publicly available, but the fact that there's now private information that's included to this data, does that now make it like you're more hesitant to like work with it or touch it now that there's private information attached to it? Okay. Okay, so for those of you with your hands up, what if this data breach was accidental rather than a hack? Do you still stand by this position? Okay. And so what if the data hack was intentionally done by a competitor to Patreon with the goal of putting them out of business? Okay. Okay. And for the final one, what if the data release was intentional by Patreon, even though it violates users' expectations? Okay, still 7. Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for participating in that activity with me. And I'll turn it over to Todd for some more questions.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to dig into something that I believe, oh no, I want to honor the name that mentioned the question. Christina, I think Christina raised this question of precedent. So a question I want to pose to the group is, what kind of precedent would this set if you were to use the data, and would other researchers then hack data and release it anonymously? I'll also put that in the chat. So feel free to raise your hand. Or you can unmute, not all at once. Okay, Imani, we're gonna go with.
Okay, I guess, okay, great. I think if you using the data doesn't set any kind of precedent, but I think something would be set if you use it and it got published and got through the ethics, and like people also read the paper and nobody raised any red flags. I think then that would set it. But I don't think that this would have any impact on whether or not people would decide to hack data. People do what they want and hack data now that people do or don't use. So I don't think that would have any impact on that. But as far as setting a precedent, I think it just depends on if it would get through the ethics committee and also people who read it.
Andrea, thank you, Imani.
So to me, it would mean that hacked data could transform the character of data and make it public data, if you could use it without any problems. And so that would incentivize hackers to hack data, or anybody to hack data, because you could change the character of the data to make it public.
Thank you. Javante.
Yeah, I agree with is it Andrea or Andrea?
It's actually Andrea. Thanks for asking.
Andrea, okay. And so I agree with what Andrea said, and the author also had a few good bullet points in the arguments against use, which was perhaps legitimizing criminal activity. I guess a question that I would have is, if breached or if leaked data is now suddenly useful for researchers, will leaked data be persecuted as hard? If it weren't useful, I guess it raises the question, if it's bad, but I can benefit from it, why punish somebody for doing something bad? And so that's one question that I have. Another point that they had was it violates users' expectation of privacy, even though you know, information can be de-identified. It can never become, or you know, it's going to be difficult to make everything perfectly anonymous. And so users, they provide their data to this website expecting it to be private. It's leaked, and now you know, it's not private. I'm not sure if that makes it okay to use it, even though it's public.
Great.
I just want to jump in and add a comment real quick with regards to de-identification of data and anonymization. If you're not familiar with LaTanya Sweeney's work, you should look it up. LaTanya took some de-identified data, health data that was available for about $25 in Boston, and over, you know, using data science magic, had a conversation at the time with the governor of the state and handed him back re-identified data on his health. So, you know, de-identification is only as strong as, you know, what's currently available. You know, there are always new ways to re-identify data. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Todd.
Yes, thank you, Nanette. Definitely check out LaTanya Sweeney's work, super pioneering work, and highly influential as well, super well cited and influential in the policy world. When you were mentioning the precedent, I think, right, there is an aspect of this going through the publication process, going through reviewers, and hopefully them also raising these important questions. And there might not be thorough guidelines in your field if you're using these data, but I do think it can have an impact on the precedent. Like if this is allowed, what liberties that might give to other researchers. And then when we think about this question of the beneficence or the public interest, like who's in the room deciding that this is worth the potential compromise of around ethics. So it's really interesting and tricky. And this is something I can say even comes up in some work that I'm looking at doing, which would be like scraping publicly available childcare licensing information. If a state Department of Human Services has an express view that like this is for parents deciding on programs for their children, is it okay to scrape that information even though it's public? There's a child care finding startup called Wonder School, and this is in the tech space, and they have an explicit prohibition, like no scraping in any way, shape, or form is allowed, but maybe some government websites don't necessarily have that or haven't really caught up. So we'll definitely have to be like thinking about these issues. One thing that I wanted to ask about, sort of in a similar vein, is how you can ensure the accuracy of the data if you're trying to use it in your research or develop a publication around this data that's hacked. Yes, I can repeat the question. I can do better. I can put it in the chat. How can you ensure the accuracy of the data if you ultimately decided that you wanted to use it? Susanna.
Well, for us, at least our group decided that we won't use hack data. So it's hard, like that was our decision, like we wouldn't even use it if it's hacked. So I don't know if other groups decided to use the data even though it's hacked. So
Andrea and then Erica. Or sorry, yeah. Andrea, you're on mute currently.
I'm sorry, you can't ensure the accuracy of it. And we were, so I don't know if we're supposed to talk about the T-Mobile stuff, but you know, the data may be even skewed. And so, you know, even if you were going to study it, you don't know, you'd have to do a whole lot of what I'm learning is data wrangling to get the data to the point where you could even see whether it's usable. So you can't even start out with the premise that it's hacked data and then you can just immediately start to use it.
Yeah. And then Erica.
So I guess I would imagine that the data that was hacked was accurate. I didn't even think about question that, so I'm not really sure how to think about this question, because I would imagine that they would hack everything and then they would make available. So I would not imagine that they would make it like put out wrong information or something that is not correct in that data set. So.
Renee, go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, the precedents in which it's being set on with, it being hacked and so forth, I can't really, know that it's correct or not correct. What if they hack it? I mean, them just hacking it, that's, on false precedents, I feel like. And then who knows, maybe they can add other stuff to it. So I wouldn't trust the data at all, because it's built on that foundation. So
Right. Yeah. And then another thing to think about in like research transparency is if you are trying to post your code, like there aren't necessarily ways for other people to verify what you did, because you might not feel comfortable sharing because the data was procured in a way that is not particularly ethical. But I will kick it back to Regina, who's going to ask some more questions.
Okay, so this next question is connected to what Javante was mentioning earlier. So people that use Patreon, they have this expectation of privacy. But now, because the data has been leaked, this privacy no longer exists. So should researchers be respecting the intent of that privacy or the reality that it no longer exists? Here's a question in the chat. Okay, Susanna?
Yeah, we, because of this expectation of privacy, I think it's important to respect that people expect data to be private and not use it, even though it's publicly available, even though other people also have access to it. That's what, as a group, my group decided that would be what we will feel more comfortable with doing.
Rumasa?
I just have this concept of minimal risk from Salganik's books. It was like being exposed to the everyday's like risk. I think, like, as I remember from the text, that they were exposing emails, names, all this budget information. I mean, just knowing the emails of the people like give you a lot of information, and then you can even like learn their accounts, and then you can even go to the drive and everything. I think privacy goes with the security. So although they are leaked, still they are insecure because these are just email. It's very, very private. And also they are unidentified. I mean, like, we have some information there, but they're not identified with us. So still it's important to protect people's privacy there, because it threatens their security.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's important to respect privacy and like protect and respect privacy of other people, especially since they are not the ones that put it out there for you to use. I think you make a good point. So my next question is how might the experiences of different individuals or groups, including the hack discussed in this case study, differ? To what degree should differential starting points, impacts, or outcomes favor in your decision to use or not use the data? So like what if, like, if you're thinking of the different participants, like the different people whose data was released, like whether they're from minority groups or not from minority groups, etc. How does this further complicate the situation here? Okay, Nayantara.
Yeah, so my group was really like concerned about this, especially like Nanette has just posted about the article. Like we were so surprised that it was like less than half of the Black population was being like told that there was this like data breach in the T-Mobile thing. And we were just like, why is that the case? But unfortunately that is like, that's just how minority populations are treated, I guess, by all the companies. And that's like definitely a huge issue. And I think that that's just was like really striking for us, that how, you know, different societies also like perceive things differently, in the sense that like we were talking mostly, well, at least I had brought up exactly, right? Yeah. So like often like minority groups are not considered to be a big player in these markets. So like we're not really they're not really considered. And I think that, you know, like even in terms of society and how society would perceive these groups. So like maybe like in different societies, it's like perceived differently. Like, okay, if you have a Patreon account, like that's not like maybe a good thing in your society and you want to keep that hidden, but now you can't because your data has just been like given away without your consent. So like that does, you know, they're just more vulnerable people in those communities, which therefore should be protected more, but unfortunately they're less protected just because of, you know, how they've been treated historically.
Thank you for sharing that. Renee, can you?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in addition to that, you know, when you think about the resources to be able to like if your data was hacked, to like you have to maybe call T-Mobile and find out, okay, how can I get protection with this? Like, you know, the time that it's taking to fix the issue. When most of the time, you know, individuals are working and so forth and may not even have time to fix the issue. So just the resources to be able to know how to, like, what do I do after a data breach and so forth. So I think it definitely affects, you know, people of color more, just in terms of like the resources on the back end with how do I even fix the problem.
Thank you. Andrea?
I was just going to say that what accounts you select to utilize is really a private matter in and of itself. And so if you're sponsoring somebody through Patreon, and you know that the fact that you're doing it is private, as well as the data associated with it. And so a lot of times we don't think about the actual acts that are happening. And in certain communities, we don't know how that gets viewed in the community. There may be a stigma associated with it that, you know, kind of nobody knows. And so, you know, it's the privacy of the act that's also an issue with respect to the data.
Yeah, no, thank you all for speaking to that. I think you all provided great points about like there's privacy on both ends, like both as the people that are using Patreon and the people that are supporting those people on Patreon. So there's different forms of information that are released from them that they had no consent to be released, and to even be able to try to like contact Patreon to get that information back. That in itself is like more work to do, especially if you don't have the time or the resources, or even know the how to do that. It's like, it's a lot at stake, and it's especially for minority groups and Black people, like it's not, they're not even like, as we saw in the article, they're not even told to the same rate that this is like their data has been released. So yeah, thank you all for sharing and participating in this activity.
And I will jump back in. Thank you so much, Regina, and to Todd. Just so you all know, I don't know, about 5 minutes after we sent you to your groups, I was like, hey, y'all want to moderate? And they're like, sure. So they did that off the cuff. So I'm so proud of and impressed by my colleagues. I will add a closing point and then we'll jump into our logistics for the evening. I'll break down a few things for you, and then we're going to work on giving you a longer break. So let me just add a couple of comments related to this activity. One thing I will mention is there is a movement to pass the mic. Privacy organizations that and organizations that work on data breaches and such, to pass the mic to people of color that work in this space, to give us a voice and to reach out to communities of color so that we better understand our rights in these spaces and what's at stake. One thing I note also often in my research is when I tell people about privacy, they're like, oh, I'm not doing anything, so it doesn't matter. It's fine if people are surveilling me, looking over my shoulder. There's a lack of education across the board, not just in communities, but across the board on what's at stake in hacks, and especially in environments where we have data brokers and folks that are combining data sets so that, I think all of us have heard this famous case where a young woman got information from Target, telling her, here's some coupons for your new baby before she even realized she was pregnant. There was a combination of products and things that were happening in her life that suggested to Target or Walmart that she was pregnant. So they knew before she did. I will also add that I think this case is particularly interesting to talk about on Juneteenth, because at the origin of Juneteenth is celebrating the last folks who found out that we were free, right? So in many ways, from that article, we are the last folks to find out the effect of hacks, right? So I think in particular, there's research to be done, and maybe Andrea and I will be doing this, Andrea and I will be doing this, on the differential effects of breaches and hacks and such on communities of color. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.